Michelle and Susan, traveling the world, interpreting for the superstars of the deaf.
Not now.
Traveling to Canberra.
We're in Canberra this week.
Yeah, well, it's really been fantastic to see so many, you know, like the complete about face in terms of the emergency broadcasting, you know, access provisions. To see now that university is affected, I hope that it's going to be maintained as the standard going forward.
Yeah,
Just letting
unfortunately,
everyone
the
know.
states have stopped using interpreters.
Who has?
Right.
States, different states around Australia.
Have stopped using interpreters.
Just letting everybody know we're live on YouTube.
Thank you. Here is Eyal, I see, and just waiting on Oscar.
Morning, everyone.
Hi, Priya.
Morning.
Hey, Priya.
Hello.
Just to give you some feedback, like I was contacted by a number of people after last week's session.
Yeah.
To say, oh, you know, why don't we have a forum for Latin American artists to come together and talk, and we'll have a community organisation. So, you know, it really sparked off some conversations within that community.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, so we're having a chat on Friday to see what do people want, and so, you know, another notch on our front belt, I think, getting some really inactive community together. Hi, Eyal.
Hello. How are we?
Hello.
Yeah, good. How are you? It looks cold where you are.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. Well, I'm a very wimpy tropical person.
Yeah.
Always overdressed, but it is cold. Well, I'm keeping it on. How is everybody?
Lovely.
Yeah, good.
Oh, here's the last two.
Veronica, I was just going to remind you as well.
Hey, Pilar.
We're waiting for the other guest, about the speed of talking as well, to remind people to just keep at a good pace to support the captioners and the interpreter too.
Yes. Oh, wow. After 20 years of working in the deaf community, I still have not learned to slow down.
Tricky, especially when you're passionate.
Terrible.
Hello, Veronica.
Lovely to see all your faces. We've got a couple of minutes to go before we start. Are there any
Everything's
things that need to be reminded today, Norm?
No, it's all good. I think the housekeeping notes are the same. So he's just texted those through in the chat, and everything else is good.
Okay, cool.
Just a reminder to get everyone to mute themselves, Veronica, unless they're speaking.
Okay.
speaking of which, I'm going to do that now.
Did you say you got the lyrics, or were they coming?
I think they're coming, but I asked he's obviously chasing them. So I've asked Oscar to put them into the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, Marissa, you still need to copy and paste them over into the caption, just to remind you. Lovely. Looking forward to this session.
Okay, it's 12 o'clock. I think we'll just get started, and then Oscar can join us when he is ready. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Little Lunch Online. Again, thank you to Feral Arts and Arts Front for enabling this platform for exciting, much needed conversations about the future of our arts sector and placing diversity at the heart of everything that we do. I want to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to elders past, present, and indeed to any elders of any communities who are joining us tonight. I want to ask you all to mute yourself if you're not talking, but do participate in the conversation through questions or comments. You might want to just pop something into the chat function or pop your hand up if you want to ask a question. Please introduce yourself on the chat function as well, so that we know who's with us today. And if you're using the interpreter, well, you know what to do. We don't need to tell you. And of course, we've got our brilliant captioners as well, making sure that access is centrally important in this platform. So really terrific to have the Feral Arts so focused on access and inclusion at every point in this platform. So today we're continuing a conversation around the role of Latin American artists here in Australia, and I'm joined by my co-host Priya Srinivasan, who you will all know is absolutely a brilliant artist, activist, choreographer, scholar. I run out of words in describing her. She's my partner in crime, really, as we try to expand the kinds of dialogues that we're having around what diversity means in the arts sector and how do we include more people and more perspectives in this important discussion. And today also I'm very grateful to have Eyal Chipkowitz and Oscar Jimenez joining us. Eyal has been in Australia since 2008. He is a tremendous entrepreneur and community cultural development practitioner, and he's also the managing director of The Boîte. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about himself in the session. I'm not going to read his full bio because it will take up too much time, but I really encourage you to get onto the Arts Front platform and have a look at his full bio with all of his accomplishments. You'll see why he's a really terrific person to have in this conversation with the experience that he brings to the discussion. So I welcome you, Eyal. And also,
thanks, Veronica.
And also Oscar is with us today. So Oscar is a Colombian-born musician and music producer who has a passion for social and cultural development. Oscar has worked with so many fantastic artists. Again, please go and check out his bio on the Arts Front website. Oscar's not only going to be our conversation partner today, but he's going to kick off this session by performing one of his original songs for us today. And Oscar, I was going to ask you if you have the lyrics to one of your songs. Can you share that in the chat function? I'll get you to unmute yourself.
Yes, of course. I'll send you in the chat.
So maybe while you're doing that, I might throw over to Eyal first and just get Eyal to tell us a little bit about yourself, your practice, what's framing your work at the moment, and tell us a little bit about The Boîte, and then we'll come to Oscar's performance and hopefully a really rich conversation about Latin American practitioners in the arts. So maybe starting with you, Eyal.
Sure, thanks Veronica, and thanks everyone for the invitation. It's really great to be here in one of so many different Zoom applications and uses that we've found in the last 2 months. We've done so many different things on Zoom. It's incredible that we didn't use it before. I'll just very quickly highlight a couple of things in my journey that kind of have led to where I am today and what I'm doing. Like Veronica said, I've been here since 2008. And before that, I was born and grew up in Venezuela, in Caracas. And since I finished high school, I've lived in a few different places. I studied in the UK and in Israel, and I lived in New York and in Florida in a couple of different stints. And I think, the idea that wherever you go, you pick up something new, which may sound silly and obvious, but it is actually quite a deep thread in like a deep insight that sometimes you can ignore for a long time. You can ignore, and then at some point you pick up that actually what contributes to who I am now is everywhere I've been, and that's been a really important element in framing everything I consider doing. And I've done lots of things. I came to Australia in 2008, in a way, preempting the disaster that Venezuela has become. It was already kind of on its way there, but it's gotten a lot worse. And I had a small child at the time. He was 4 when I decided it was time to leave. And I just thought, let's find a place for him. I was a designer for a long time, graphic and industrial designer in Venezuela. And I did that for the first couple of years. But designing for me was a very lonely profession, and deliberately so. I wanted to work by myself. And there was something in moving to Australia that I kind of decided to switch off this hermit and not do anything by myself. So design was the first thing I did for the first couple of years, because that's what my resume said I had been doing, but not because I wanted to do it. And then I set up a restaurant bar, which is where me and Oscar met. That very quickly became sort of a Latin American hub of sorts. It was modeled on a bus in the center of Caracas, where all the furniture is uneven, and then the music is so loud that you can't speak. And if you dare ask somebody to turn the volume down, they open the door, push you out, and keep going. And that was the spirit of this place. And it really highlighted that there's a thirst for kind of cultural identity havens here, that we're full of invitations to change, but there aren't that many places where what we bring as migrants or as individuals is really openly and gratefully welcome. But I mean, I did that for about 3 years. Hospitality is not an easy industry, and I had a very small place with a lot of investment in arts, in the music. So the business didn't survive that, but for me it was a trigger into community development, like a pathway into community development. I established an organization called Casa Cultura right after I closed the venue, which sort of retained the cultural collaboration elements and got rid of the rent and stock problems. And then in the last 3 years, I started working at the Boîte. Well, I joined their board at the Boîte first, and then slowly one thing led to another, and I took over the managing director position in February this year when Roger retired. And well, if anybody's not familiar with the work of the Boîte, we exist to make sure that the music you can hear in Victoria mostly is as diverse as we all are, and that there are opportunities created for musicians that don't play mainstream genres. And since the world turned upside down in March, we announced that our response was going to be adapt, not cancel. And it took us exactly 4.5 days to put our first show online. And since then, we've put on 12 shows, most of them ticketed. I mean, some of them are different formats that don't have artist fees because of the format of the show, but all the shows in which we present original music and we pay the artists, and we've been really encouraging audiences to buy tickets and watch the shows online just as though they were in a venue. And it's been a very exciting, very steep climb, but a great little journey of 2 months with lots of learning.
Thank you, Eyal. Look, I think it's really fascinating how agile some organizations and communities have been. And I'd really like to come back to you on the subject of how easy it's been to adapt or hard. But, you know, what happens when you're tapping into a community that has enormous capacity to, you know, to respond agilely and pivot and you know, adapt to its circumstances. But let's now hear from Oscar. He has a lovely performance for us today. And then we're going to ask Oscar to tell us a little bit about his journey as well. So over to you, Oscar.
Okay. I think I managed. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I wrote this song. It's a song called Naturaleza, which I wrote on a trip to Alice Springs. After like 12 years of living in Australia, I came here in 2000. And it was just my my view on the experience of meeting Aboriginal culture, and it was a beautiful encounter for me, and where I felt like connected as a human being. So I think that's the song tells a bit of that story. So I'll play it for you. La historia que cuentan es verdad impresa en pared y piedra, mensaje que llena y escrito en la arena se encuentra la herencia de tierra que al mundo despierta. Llévame y entra por mis venas, júrame que al mundo respetas, soñaré con pura belleza, júrame, oh naturaleza. Pintaron estrellas con su misma huella y entre andando y canto amaron su greda. Seguiré el ejemplo, su lección eterna, pues somos los hijos de la misma tierra. Llévame y entra por mis venas, júrame que al mundo respetas, soñaré con pura belleza, júrame, oh naturaleza, oh naturaleza. Madre tierra ancestral, madre tierra es amar, madre tierra es belleza. Madre tierra ancestral, madre tierra es amar, madre tierra es belleza. So
Amazing. So fantastic. What an amazing performer.
thank you.
Big claps for you. So fantastic to have Oscar as part of the MAV team. He really shakes things up at the office, as you can imagine. It's great having creatives around and not just administrators like me. But I'm going to hand over to Priya, who's got a few questions for the group. And let's let's spend the next 15 minutes in conversation. Let me know if anyone wants to jump in using the chat function.
Oscar, I just wanted to echo what Veronica said. That was so beautiful and so meaningful as well. It's really great to hear you play and speak your voice through your music. Thank you for sharing that. I was wondering if you could take perhaps just a 1 or 2 minute quick talk, just share with us your journey from Colombia to Australia and a little bit about your artistic practice.
Sure. I came here in 2000 as a student. I wasn't planning on migrating here, but I just fell in love with the place and finished my studies, got the opportunity to extend my visa, and I had a successful run with a band that I had. I initially came to Sydney. So I did like 8 years of touring around Australia, around Asia, and even Latin America. And then I came back, and I got really involved through my travels into social projects. Basically, I would do concerts in communities during my travels, or support organizations, and that really struck me how much power music has in bringing people together, and also songwriting, how it can actually print stories and really transcend language. So since then, I've been like really being back and forwards between doing music and also getting involved with communities, and I felt that Melbourne offered that opportunity with organizations like MAV and WAT and so much diversity organizations that support that. So I make the move to Melbourne, where I met my partner, Catherine, who's also a visual artist, and currently working on my own solo projects, as well as another project that I created here in Melbourne with my partner called Amado Tribe. And it's been a beautiful, Melbourne has offered me a new perspective. It's such a diverse, it's such a, at the same time, competitive thing, which just makes you grow as an artist and as a human being. And it's been a beautiful journey. And I've been in Melbourne 7 years now, and working at MAV probably about a year and a half.
Awesome. I guess, I'm really curious because I have been very much influenced by Chicano and Latina thinkers growing up, and partly because my first encounter was with Ernesto Munoz, who's joined us today, an amazing and brilliant artist who moved from Chile at a very young age and came to Melbourne. And I encountered him when he was learning Indian dance, and we were part of a company, the first Asian experimental dance company in Australia, the Baratam Dance Company. And I very much remember his transition and his transformation into being Indian was a fantastic ability he had. And a lot of people would comment that he looked more Indian than we did on stage. And so this slippage about Latin Americans and South Asians in a way was very interesting to me. And then when I lived in America, especially at UCLA, I really encountered Chicana feminist thought, Latina feminist thought, the work of Gloria Anzaldúa on borderlands and mestiza culture, as well as my mentor, Marta Savigliano, an Argentine political theorist who wrote about the tango, and really made me understand dance as a political expression, as well as the training that I had under someone who calls himself a guerrilla border ethnographer, sort of terrorist artist, Guillermo Gomez Pina, under whom I learned so much about artistic practice. And I'm wondering, and I feel like what's missing in Australia is sort of that broad thinking and also the practices of Latin American and Chicana thought melding with questions here, especially even around questions of indigeneity, because colonization in Latin America is so different to other parts of the world, and how the different forms of colonization has created a mestiza culture that is very different and actually has a lot to say for First Nations and Indigenous practices here, which I come back to your first question, Oscar, when you said you went to Alice Springs and it motivated you to write this song. So I guess I was curious in a way if you and also Eyal and Veronica, each of you coming from 3 different countries, and your experience in artistic institutions as artists and also in the ways that you've imagined yourself. Could you speak a little bit about your own journey? And I know we don't have much time because clearly we have to keep talking about this. But just if you can start us off, Oscar and Eyal and Veronica, if you could continue from that to speak a little about why you think this Latin American experience is so understated in Australia and not really as visible as it could be. Just take any of those comments and threads and do what you think is useful for you.
Okay, I'll be short. I've been in the Australian music industry scene for, I would say, professionally 15 years, and I see it's a very young country for Latin, or for say to create its own Latin American music scene. It has, but it's like you can't compare it, as you say, you can't compare it with America. Because the amount of Latin Americans that live there. But yes, I felt like there was there is a role that's Latin Americans for us to speak up of what's happening here and really connect to the context. And I think that's where it shifted for me on that point of my role as when I said that I connected as a human being. That's where I said I'm not just a Colombian guy singing here and talking about my culture. I'm a human being that has a responsibility to talk about these issues that are happening here, and that's where I feel that a lot of Latin artists have a lot of potential to speak up because of their context and their history.
That's great, thank you. Eyal?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be a bit sore in a couple of the things I would like to add, but I mean, I think one thing to consider is the role of sort of the media and the stereotype of what Latin America means here in Australia, in the rest of the world, but particularly in Australia. I think the party Latin lover dancing with the stars stereotype, not to mention the drug smuggling and gun wielding one, and they really have had a lot of impact on how we as a population, we stop for a second to experience something Latin America and then run away from it because it isn't completely safe in our perception of what it means. And I think that plays a big role. I think I felt in the venue that I ran for 3 years, I felt like a lot of the people that came through were coming in for that kind of Disneyland experience. We go in and we live this crazy, loud, tactile place, and then we run away and we never go back to it again, but we've been there, we went there. And I think that's quite pervasive in the perception of Latin America, and how the vibe that the artists are bringing to the table is encouraged or invited to be a little part of a little something, but then that's it. That's as much as we can take of this intensity.
Almost like a tourist destination within Melbourne itself.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, there's a couple of kind of cultural things. Latin America isn't really a homogeneous thing. That's another slightly misconceived idea that Latin America is this one thing. For convenience, we call it Latin America because there's a common language, really. A bit of common history. There are some common traits, but Latin America is quite broken up into into many different things that are probably as different. Somebody from the south of South America is probably as different to someone from the Caribbean as they are from somebody from Europe or India or and I also think that this contributes to sort of putting a barrier to the contribution, because people from Latin America, when they're invited to participate, they're invited to participate as Latin Americans, as though this has a powerful meaning to them and they'll be glad to represent Latin America. But in reality, I want to be invited because of something a lot more granular. and I think it generates resistance in coming forward because you're misrepresenting who I am, what I'm bringing to the table.
But I guess this brings up your question about assimilability too, like the ways in which different experiences of colonization enables Latin Americans in varying degrees to be able to assimilate versus not assimilate. Whereas like for Asians, it's much harder to assimilate, even racially. You see this very different kind of history sort of at play. And also the idea of different ways of migration coming because of, political unrest. You have a very different situation in Latin America, the 70s migratory period particularly, and Veronica can speak to this, how a lot of people came here seeking political asylum, which is a very different form of migration to the other kinds of migration we've seen, and how that has also determined the way that people have approached themselves in assimilating or not here in Australia. Veronica, could you speak to that a little bit?
That's very true. I mean, here in this group, we have different waves of migration represented, with Pilar and I coming from, that first big wave of Latin American migration in the 70s and 80s, which was really a response to the kinds of political and economic turmoil in Latin America. And so what that might have done for communities coming here is, I think, set a tone for assimilation that is perhaps different from some of these newer waves of migration that are coming with different motivations. And, I do see that, for example, across the arts, we have seen Latin American artists really still always at the fringes and performing in places where the focus is fundamentally kind of celebratory rather than, using art as social commentary or, using art as political commentary. And I wonder how much that has been influenced by the experiences of those migrants, of people coming from Chile, of Argentina and Uruguay, who are escaping all of that turmoil, as opposed to people coming now like Oscar, coming as a student or coming seeking opportunities. And whether, I have great hope that this new wave of migration from Latin America can help to break down some of those stereotypes that you mentioned, Eyal. But I think it's really important to understand that people come with, a range of different experiences in their bags, and we can't ever let that go completely. And that, even though, much of the lack of participation or lack of representation is down to the extent to which the sector embraces difference, I think we also play our part in that, in terms of what we want to, how we want to advance our migrant journey here, and the role that assimilation plays, as you say. But then keeping in mind that not, all Latin Americans are not all white. And I think, it's very difficult for someone who's a person of color to come from Latin America and also feel that they can easily assimilate into Australian culture, or that they would want to. So, I think that it's a really complex phenomenon. And I just don't think there's been enough conversation about this subject matter in the arts, in the way that perhaps, because of our situation regionally, we've had a focus on Asian artists. But I think it's really time that we expand this conversation around diversity to understand that, the nature of participation in different communities.
Well, exactly. And I was going to say that what I would love to see is triangulated conversations, actually, with Indigenous, First Nations people, artists, thinkers, Latin Americans and Asian Americans, for example, Asian Australians, in a triangulation to think through colonization and how it informs their practices very differently. I think it would be really, really intriguing and interesting and really fruitful to see how a triangulated exchange could shift our thinking around these questions and complexify some things that we take for granted, and we just sort of even out very smoothly, often because we're always in conversation with the white as the center or Euro-American thought as the center. And I'm really keen on looking at how do we move away from that, decentralizing that to actually ask a different kind of question from other places of marginality and power that we've all experienced in different ways.
So one of the things that has happened, and we've come to the end of our session, but I wanted to let you know that as a result of commencing this conversation here on the Little Lunch Online platform, is that Pilar and Eyal, Oscar and I are thinking that, you know, we need a much more extensive conversation. So we're looking at developing a forum for later on this year that really enables us to dig deep on some of these issues. And so please all keep an eye out for that. And we'll obviously maintain that connection with Arts Front so that we can promote it. But, you know, it's been really fantastic to pick up some of these threads. We don't want to let them go. We want to be able to continue to unravel a bit and see where we end up. So not today because we're out of time, but soon, I hope, we'll have an opportunity to start, you know, really drilling down on some of these issues that we've just touched the surface on today. So look, I want to thank everyone for their contribution. It's brief, but I think you get a sense that there's a lot more to be said. And a thank you to the interpreters and to the captioners for their incredible work in bringing this content to everyone's accessibility. And thank you all for participating today. Thanks to Arts Front, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good points made. Thank you, Veronica, Priya, and all the other contributors.
Thanks, Srini.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.